A Trinidad and Tobago parliamentary report in 2018 made two disturbing observations about that country's quarry sector. One, of the 67 mining operators on record, only 6 were operating with current licenses. And two, the state loses large sums of money in the form of unpaid and uncollected royalties from quarry companies. This unregulated state of affairs is also having an adverse impact on the environment, since many quarry companies do not follow environmentally sustainable practices. But the government is hoping that a global environment facility funded project, IWECo, will change that. Alicia Aquing, project coordinator with IWECo, believes a quarry rehabilitation project that her organization is carrying out in northeast Trinidad will inspire quarry operators to operate sustainably by virtue of lessons learned from her model site. It's a big challenge in view of the many problems plaguing the industry. A white paper on the industry noted problems in the sector ranging from the presence of criminal elements to biodiversity loss, stress on the natural water systems, and deforestation caused by illegal quarrying or poor quarrying practices, and the problem of ineffective regulatory agencies unable to enforce laws governing the sector. As for the 61 unlicensed operators, the parliamentary report later clarifies that these refer to mineral processing plants, whereas there were 42 licensed quarry operators in 2015 and another 46 operating under expired licenses. I am IPS Caribbean correspondent Jewel Fraser, and in this Voices from the Global South podcast, I pay a visit to the IWECo quarry rehabilitation site to learn more about this issue.
My name is Alicia Aquing, and I'm the GEF IWECo National Project Coordinator for Trinidad and Tobago.
Where exactly in Trinidad is this, and what is the work that IWECo is doing here?
Okay, so we are at National Quarries Company Limited, and it's a state quarry for Trinidad and Tobago. And National Quarries is located in the northeast area of Trinidad and Tobago. We have the huge Valencia watershed, as well as it's considered a forest reserve, and that's where the majority of sand and gravel quarrying takes place in Trinidad.
What kind of damage does quarrying do to the land?
Well, from our experience so far on the demonstration side, we're looking at loss of soil, nutrients, we're looking at loss of biodiversity, species, flooding and erosion. However, the IWECo project aims to address all of these what you would call negative impacts of land degradation. So the IWECo project officially commenced in May 2017 with the signing of a project country agreement between, GEF IWECo and Trinidad and Tobago. However, on-the-ground intervention started in May 2018. The project is expected to be completed by December 2021, and the target for this project is the rehabilitation of 40 hectares within the northeast area of Trinidad and Tobago. It's open to any operator, any environmentalist who may want to come and learn about what we have done and to replicate onto their sites as this project grows and becomes a national project, as we move out of the demonstration site phase.
So, can you tell us, why is quarry rehabilitation such a big deal, such a big issue here in Trinidad and Tobago?
It's one of the major contributors to land degradation, of course, right? And the project focuses in the northeast of Trinidad and Tobago, which is a forest reserve. And that's what this project is hoping to address. How do you put back what was lost from, the mining and extraction sector, as well as any sort of deforestation that may have occurred on these quarry sites?
Jan Bethlehem, IWECo's regional project coordinator, says the Trinidad and Tobago government considers restoring lands degraded by quarrying to be a priority.
My name is Jan Betlem and I am the IWECo Regional Project Coordinator. Well, IWECo answers requests from national governments, and IWECo is funded, by the way, partially by the GEF, the Global Environment Facility, and partially through co-funding from participating organizations. These can be government and non-government organizations. And in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, the government has clearly prioritized focus on quarry sites. And the title of the national project document for Trinidad and Tobago is as follows: reduce and reverse land degradation at selected quarry sites by an integrated water, land and ecosystem management approach. So it's clear that the government of Trinidad has observed that the rehabilitation of quarry sites needs to have attention. And as such, they have asked through UNEP, the Global Environment Facility, to make available resources to make a start with that.
I spoke with Brandon Rampersad, an experienced consultant within the quarry sector. He shared with me some of the challenges the sector faces in operating sustainably and why having a license gives operators incentive to protect the environment.
My name is Brandon Rampersad, and I'm currently one of the lead consultants with a local consulting firm, Terran Resources Limited. Terran Resources Limited provides a wide suite of technical and engineering services to both the local quarrying and construction sectors. One of the services that we provide to the local industry would be environmental impact assessments, development of environmental management plans. We do mine design plans. We do reserve assessments, geotechnical investigations. We are also engaged in the mechanical side of the business, undertaking plant design and plant commissioning type projects. So we actually operate across all spheres of the local quarrying industry. While we are not a quarry owner operator, our firm does provide management services to a couple local quarries where we actually provide the overall operations management inputs for the quarry operations. From an environmental perspective, the quarrying activities are severely invasive. There is, I would say, no way that we can extract the mineral resources that we chase without imposing significant impacts on the natural environment. The question that, or the challenge that presents itself to us is, can it be done sustainably? And the short answer is yes, it can be done sustainably, and it can be done responsibly. There is a lot of room for improvement, but having said that, we have to recognize that a lot of the companies have been trying to make those improvements over the years, and they've been able to do so fairly successfully. So when you look across the industry in Trinidad and Tobago, you see different degrees of effort. So you would find with the larger operators, because of the corporate exposure, they would invest a lot more into implementing sustainable practices. So what you would see is, for instance, when they engage in the actual activity, if it's a greenfield site, then they would stockpile the soil separately, not allow that soil, the topsoil, to mix with the underlying overburden, which tends to have very little organic value or value that soil would typically have. So that soil will be stockpiled, protected, and preserved for use in rehabilitation. The challenge with rehabilitation is having soil, available soil, where you can actually plant, where whatever you plant, if it's reforestation you're going after, is able to establish itself and then flourish from there. So preservation of soil is a critical thing that has to be paid attention to, and that you'd find that some of the larger operators would be paying attention to. The next thing that they would be obviously paying attention to is the protection of groundwater. Gravels are water-bearing strata. And it's easy for groundwater to become contaminated if the operators themselves are not very careful in how they conduct their operations. So one of the primary means through which groundwater could be contaminated in a typical quarry operation could be from a simple thing as a fuel spill or lubricant spills. That may take place when machines are being refueled in the pits and what have you. So you find that measures would be adopted in these types of operations to ensure that you don't have those sort of spills taking place and those sort of contaminants adversely affecting the, getting into the soil and potentially contaminating the groundwater. So groundwater is the next thing. Surface water quality is another thing. Most of these operations have they do processing. Processing produces sediment-laden effluent, and that effluent has to be treated either for reuse or if it has to be discharged into a water course. So they would, for instance, national quarries in the past, they invested in water treatment equipment. Typically on the island, we more go for the use of sedimentation ponds, where gravity is the primary means of settling out the sediments in the water. And that water is either recirculated for reuse, which is the ideal situation, or if they're forced to, at least when it's discharged at a quality where it doesn't present any risk to any receiving waters where it's being discharged into. So those are some of the things that you find the larger operators would be doing from an environmental perspective.
Are these measures expensive to implement?
I would say it depends on the scale. For large-scale operations, yes, they are expensive to implement. For smaller-scale operations, they would be less expensive, quite obviously. The thing that we always have to remember about quarrying operations and mineral extraction, mineral processing operations on the whole, it doesn't matter if you're extracting a metallic mineral or a non-metallic mineral, wherever you do it in the world, these are capital-intensive businesses. They require a lot of capital up front to be able to set them up for success and to set them up for sustainability. And if that capital isn't available, or the operator making the investment is limited in what he's able to do financially, then you would find that he may or may not be able to implement some of these critically important environmental measures.
I understand that when a quarry ceases operations, the laws, the acts regulating quarries in Trinidad and Tobago require that quarry operators put measures in place to rehabilitate the quarries. Am I correct?
Yes, under the current Minerals Act, which was enacted in 2000, rehabilitation is a compulsory activity that has to be done. In fact, operators, once they're licensed operators, they are required to post a rehabilitation bond, which the ministry would leverage as the instrument with which they would force rehabilitation if there's non-compliance.
Alicia Aquing shared with Voices from the Global South some of the approaches IWECo is using to rehabilitate quarried lands.
We have several interventions that we are working on. One, we're looking at rehabilitating degraded lands using mixed forest species. We have implemented a community nursery with a capacity of about 10,000 plants. The other intervention that we're doing is soil nutrification using a mixture of waste bare hops, waste tree cuttings, and sargassum. So that's the second intervention. The third intervention we're looking at is the construction of live check dams, and that is to stem the flow of erosion on sites. The fourth intervention that we're looking at is the use of vetiver, the vetiver grass, and that's being used for soil stabilization and land stabilization. And it has worked pretty well as a natural element that we've introduced, and the hope of all these interventions at the project site is for replication in additional partner sites, which we're hoping would happen throughout the quarrying sector in Trinidad and Tobago. I'm working with two NGOs, the IAM movement, and they have focused primarily on the vetiver system, and then the Trust for Sustainable Livelihoods. Both IAM movement and the Trust for Sustainable Livelihoods, they conducted training. We have retired foresters on the team, on the technical team, and they have focused on the ecology of the project and the use of mixed forest species and the different type of quarry rehabilitation techniques that we've used. One of the things that we've done under IWECo is to train community members within surrounding communities from Valencia to Sangre Grande in quarry rehabilitation techniques. So we have 27 members on board, and they're all referred to as IWECo Quarry Rehabilitation Champions, and they are fully versed. They underwent 3 months of training in classroom as well on site, and we have this labor resource with the technical know-how to assist our operators and the sector in terms of achieving what they have to do under quarry rehabilitation regulations.
Carlton Roberts, the lead consultant on the IWECo project, is a retired deputy conservator of forests. He explains how the IWECo approach is being implemented.
All right, my name is Carlton Roberts, and presently I'm the lead technical consultant on the IWECo project in Trinidad. This site would have been similar to a site next door, fully forested with large trees and functioning, producing all the ecosystem services and so on. But because they needed to get the minerals from the ground, they had to bulldoze the area, bulldoze all the trees and extract the minerals. Part of the quarry operator's responsibility is to rehabilitate the area, return the place to vegetation cover, so that the land would then become productive again. If that doesn't happen, the land remains marginal and it remains degraded and it becomes unproductive, so that the ecosystem services, those would be lost if the place is not restored with proper vegetation. And this IWECo project is aimed at putting back trees on the land. So these species grow naturally, they regenerate themselves, and they form a unique ecosystem in this area. And the idea of this project is to bring some of those same species back into the area that was degraded. And in order to do that, we have set up the nursery, as you would have seen. And what we do, we go into the forest, pick up young seedlings, and we call them wildlings, take them to the nursery, pot them in bags with soil, rear them until they are about 1 meter, 0.5 to 1 meter height, and bring them back into the field and plant them. So far, we are getting excellent growth. Excellent growth. The hope is that in, let's say, 5 years, this area will be covered with the trees. The canopies, the crowns of the trees would close back and form a canopy like the natural forest and start the whole ecological process over again. So when these trees are mature, they drop the leaves would rot on the ground, release the nutrients, the trees take up the nutrients, and the whole nutrient cycle goes on and on into perpetuity.
I remember reading somewhere that one of the things I'd read about with the reforestation projects is that sometimes the species that are planted are really not appropriate. So, can you tell me how does this project measure up in that regard?
Right. Before we planted anything here, we did what you call a biodiversity or species diversity survey in the natural forest to find out what is there. And when we found out what is there, we tried our best to get plants that were already established, get them from the forestry division and planted them here. So we are very close to what is in the forest. We try to encourage the plants that would become habitat for the animals, the wildlife that exist in this area. And now that we are establishing our own nursery, it's based on species that are in the area. So we go in the area, as I said before, take up the wildlings of those species and rear them in the nursery and plant them out. So we wouldn't have that problem.
So, I understand the IWECo project involves a number of components. I understand that there's a vetiver planting component and there's a component that your NGO works with, the quarry rehabilitation champions. Can you tell us why is the work of the quarry rehabilitation champions so important to this project?
A project like this can only be successful, and I say that categorically, can only be successful if we involve the nearby community. Now, the nearby community, they are the ones who suffer as a result of the land degradation. As the rain falls, their community is flooded. So, when we told them that we can solve this problem by planting trees, they were happy to participate and be part of the solution. And they are working as a unit to bring a solution to a problem that exists right in their backyards.
Okay, so my name is Marva Ann Neptune White and my job title is Quarry Rehabilitation Champion. I have been working on the project approximately 21 months.
And how did you get involved with it and what training did you receive?
Okay, so I got involved with it through the councillor. She invited me to a meeting that they were having in our area. I went to the meeting, I listened to the program and the plans they had to rehabilitate the environment and the forest. And so they asked for our names and email address and so on. And then they called us back later and told us that they were about to start the program and we needed to go and follow the forms. And we did that. Then they called us for an interview. We did the interview. And then I was selected. And then here we are in the program.
Okay. So I understand you received some special training for the job?
Yes, we received special training in that we did some workshops in the classroom and where we were taught about the soil, about the different way to mix the soil, the way that you handle the plants to save the environment, the importance of the forestry, what the forest provides us with a lot of water and handicraft and medicine. And so it was a holistic about the whole environment and about rehabilitating the forest and bringing it back to its original state.
Great. So can you describe for us what is a typical work day for you?
Okay, a typical work day, we start the day with morning prayer, that's around 8 o'clock, and then Mr. Carlton give us our different assignments. That may be mixing soil, planting, transplanting, weeding, cleaning the plants, watering the plants, all of that we do on a daily basis.
Can you tell me, what would you say are the greatest challenges you and the other champions face in getting this job done?
Well, one of the greatest challenges is the temperature for the day. Sometimes we work in extreme hot temperatures and so on. But I guess that is more the greatest challenge that we will have is the condition of the day, the climate of the day.
Great, I can understand that.
But Jan Bethlem and Brandon Ramprasad explain that implementing rehabilitation projects like IWECos may be very difficult to achieve without the right conditions.
The quarries that we're working with currently are engaging in active rehabilitation. In one of those that I can cite, have actually converted lands that have been exhausted and quarried for many years. They've now converted that land into agriculture land. And they have engaged in tree crops. I know they've tried some short crops in the past, and even now they're continuing to focus, but the focus more is on tree crops. So we're talking like, for instance, citrus and fruit trees, rather than short crops like vegetables and legumes and that sort of stuff.
Okay, so what are some of the problems or challenges in getting this rehabilitation done?
The thing is with rehabilitation is the planning for the rehabilitation ought to really start at the beginning of the activity. So when a quarry starts, when it commences day one of its operation, all that it intends to do or all that it plans to do ought to be done with the end goal in mind, which is rehabilitation. Oftentimes, what you find happening is that quarries may not put a lot of emphasis or a lot of focus on what or how they intend to rehabilitate at the very beginning. And then by the time they leave it for the end, it becomes a very expensive exercise and something that could quite possibly not be financially attractive to do. So you want to make sure that whatever it is you intend to do as far as rehabilitation goes, that you plan for that from the very beginning, and that the plan the plan sets out, I should say, how you're going to get there from the beginning to the end of the project.
What I've noticed is that the way how quarried sites are left behind after exploitation differ. Sometimes these sites are left behind just as bare rock, and sometimes people have done some efforts to put some soil back. And that, of course, defines how fast nature can take over. Nature is incredibly strong in restoring vegetation cover, but if you need to start from bare rock, then of course it takes much longer than when there is already some material available. So what we try to do, and we try to provide some guidance to quarry operators, how to operate in quarries and how to leave the sites behind and how to re-establish a certain vegetation cover. And that I think is a useful support to quarry operators, but also to governments to include such guidance when they provide licenses to operators, to tell operators this is how you should work and this is how you should leave the site behind. That's just one of the challenges. If you talk about rehabilitation of old sites, you need to identify which are sites which are really available to rehabilitate. And it turns out it's not always that easy to agree with everybody around the table to agree on which sites can be rehabilitated. So it sounds easy, but it's not that easy always.
Alicia Aquing is unfazed by these obstacles, and she points to the changes already being seen at the demonstration site as proof of the project's success.
In terms of addressing loss of biodiversity, what we would have noticed when we started this project in May 2018 was on the quarry was complete silence. Now, a year and a half later to almost 2 years, you're actually hearing birds. We're seeing butterflies, we're seeing deer tracks, we're seeing anteaters and different small animals coming back to site. And in terms of the biodiversity, the forest species that we're planting would encourage that wildlife to come back and that sort of biodiversity to continue to prosper again. So whatever was lost due to quarrying in the forest reserve, we're trying to put it back to the natural state. And in a short space of time, we've experienced amazing success, and we're actually tracking the number of species cited, the types of plants we're using to help in terms of replication at a national level.
Great. However, the vexed question of the lack of licenses for quarrying operators remains. I asked Brandon Rampersad if obtaining the licenses would help promote more sustainable practices in the industry and why so few operators are able to obtain one.
So firstly, to obtain a license from the Ministry of Energy, which is the regulatory agency, the primary regulatory agency, one has to obtain statutory approvals from a number of other agencies. There is no one answer to that question. It's a confluence of things, and the problems emanate not only from the regulator side of things, but it also emanates from the operator side of things. So if you were to present that question to the regulator, they might say they're not getting the information that they're requesting from the operators. And if you were to talk to some of the operators, they would say that the ministry is not receptive to what they're actually submitting. So there are a host of issues that are affecting the licensing process. I would say there's no one agency to blame per se. If you were to talk to some operators, they would tell you that their ability to access financing, for instance, for their projects is usually stymied by the lack of a license or not having a license. So the license itself, or if operators were to be granted licenses, I think it would enhance their ability to access financing, to refinance their projects, or to even finance rehabilitation type projects within their operations. So yes, it would definitely have a positive impact, but I would say that it should not be left to the operators to self-regulate. We do need to have strong legislation in place to ensure that the environment is protected and that whatever activities are allowed, those activities are conducted responsibly and sustainably. The industry at the moment, it's struggling in the current climate, and usually when operators find themselves, when demand is very low, and they're not able to access, or they're not able to obtain licenses, and then in so doing access financing, what may inevitably be sacrificed would be the environmental practices that they would need to conduct their activities sustainably. So in the current climate, I think the industry and the regulator definitely need to sit down, and they need to chart a common course in terms of how we could confront the challenges that currently present themselves to us. Certainly, it can, where we continue as we've been going over the past 3 years. On the regulator side and on the side of the operators, improvements are required, and that will only happen if both parties were to sit down and have a long, hard talk about it.
Great, thank you.
Nevertheless, Alicia Aquing remains upbeat about the future of sustainable quarrying in Trinidad and Tobago.
Because of the successes on this demonstration site, we have partnered with Carib Glass Limited, and they're the largest producer and only manufacturer of glass packaging in the Caribbean. And we have done a 2-hectare demonstration site with them. And we're hoping to increase this to another 4 hectares. And as word spreads around in terms of the successes of the IWECo project and what we've achieved, we hope to have replication and buy-in and support from other small quarry operators within Trinidad and Tobago based on what we have done in terms of quarry rehabilitation interventions and lessons learned.
Jan Bethlehem concludes with some thoughts on the need for a major change in attitudes and thinking, while quarry rehabilitation champion Marva Ann White sums up for us nicely the responsibility that all of us share to nature and the environment.
Well, what I would like, but that is in general, that's my global view, What I would like to see happening in land use on a global level is that we look more at sustainability and not at very fast profit today or tomorrow, but also look at sustainability of our interventions on the longer term. And I think that's the only way how we as global society can survive on our planet. And that, of course, is also applicable in the region. We should be very careful not to use our resources, including land, in a way which brings very fast benefit, but leaves big problems and big challenges behind. We should more look at a holistic way at how we use our natural resources, and land use, sustainable land use is one of those ways.
God has created nature for us to help us, and now nature depends on us to help it, because as we look, we see it's sort of land degradation, and now people just cutting down the forest, burning and slashing, and they just don't care about the forest. But the forest is here to provide for us, and now the forest is the nature and everything is crying out to us, so that to ask us to help. Nature need help now, and this is our time now to help nature and to put back this place as it was in its original state. And that's what we are about here, trying to make good of what man have destroyed. Now we as man are trying to re-establish and to make good what we ourselves have destroyed.
This is Jewel Fraser reporting on land degradation issues caused by quarrying in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you for listening to this Voices from the Global South podcast.